Hey everyone, we are working to hit 1,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
Somebody, pause that, because I need the people watching this right now to understand what they just heard. That is the head coach of the Cleveland Browns standing at a podium, on camera, in front of every reporter in that room, telling the entire football world that Shedeur Sanders ran first-team reps in 11-on-11 drills. He said it out loud, with his mouth, into a microphone. And then, within hours, the coverage machine cranked up and told you the exact opposite story. That is not a disagreement about analysis. That is not a difference of opinion. That is a choice. And today, on Dre Reports, I'm Dre Fiver, and we are going line by line, fact by fact, receipt by receipt, through one of the most deliberately constructed media distortions I have seen around a young quarterback in years. Buckle in. This one is going to hurt some feelings. Let's go all the way back to April. The Cleveland Browns hold a 3-day voluntary veteran minicamp. And I need you to hold on to that word, voluntary. No pads. No defensive backs pressing receivers in live coverage. No pass rush. No competitive weight attached to a single snap. The NFL creates this specific window for teams that have just hired a new head coach. It is by design and orientation. It is terminology installation. It is a philosophical framework introduction. It is a coaching staff teaching 30-something professional athletes how this particular group of coaches thinks and communicates. That is the entire purpose of the exercise. It is not an evaluation. It is not a depth chart audition. It is not a competition. It is a meeting with shoulder pads nearby. Todd Monken, who, by the way, just built one of the most explosive offenses in the entire NFL while coordinating for the Baltimore Ravens, stood in front of reporters after those 3 days and was about as transparent as a head coach can be. He said he had a 40,000-foot view. He told everyone in that room not to project too much onto what they'd seen. He specifically outlined that the practice script was designed with run-heavy periods that naturally compressed quarterback reps in a way that created a visual imbalance that did not reflect actual rep distribution. He said Sanders received more reps overall because of how the script was built. And he said, and this is the part that should have been the headline everywhere, that Shedeur Sanders ran first-team reps in 11-on-11 team drills. That is what the head coach said. That is the documented record. That is on tape. Now here is what some corners of the football media decided the story actually was. Watson dominated. Watson looked commanding, determined, forward-thinking. Sanders was struggling to keep up. One outlet, and I am not making this up, suggested that Shedeur might not even hold the backup spot. Third string. After 3 days of voluntary walkthrough sessions, in helmets and shorts, I want you to sit with that for a second. Third string. From 72 hours of optional, no contact, no competition, scheme installation practice. That conclusion was presented with confidence. It was passed around. It got repeated. And you know what repetition does in the media ecosystem? It starts to feel like consensus even when it started as nothing. You hear something enough times, from enough different mouths, and your brain starts filling in the credibility it never actually earned. That is not analysis. That is not reporting. That is a story that somebody decided on first and then went looking for pieces to hang on it. And here's my personal opinion. Since that's what you came here for, I think some people in football media have a deeply uncomfortable relationship with Shedeur Sanders that has nothing to do with football. It started before the draft. It continued through the combine. It followed him to Cleveland. And it did not take a single day off once training camp conversations started. The volume of negative projection aimed at this specific quarterback relative to the actual evidence available is not normal. It is not standard critical analysis applied evenly across the board. It is something else, and I am tired of pretending I don't see it. Let's talk about Miami, because this part of the story did not get nearly the attention it deserved, and in my opinion, it tells you more about who Shedeur Sanders is as a competitor than anything that happened in those 3 days of minicamp. Before the cameras showed up, before the content cycle had a reason to care, before anyone had a narrative to push, Shedeur Sanders was in Miami doing private, unglamorous, early morning quarterback work, footwork drills, throwing routes, the kind of repetitive, invisible labor that either happens during the offseason or it doesn't. And the only person who decides is the player himself when nobody's grading it, nobody's filming it, and showing up is purely an act of personal competitive commitment. A content creator found him, a streamer who wanted to capture some footage of Shedeur throwing, get some clicks, build some social momentum. And here's where it gets real, because Shedeur's response, The way he handled that interaction was not what a player worried about his image would do. He didn't perform for the camera. He didn't give the streamer 30 seconds of content to stay likable online. He turned them down, not rudely, not dismissively, but with a clarity that told you exactly what was living inside his chest at that moment. He essentially said, "You need to understand what this football means right now. Minicamp is coming. Training camp is coming. I have a competition to win and I cannot afford to treat a single day carelessly. Come back when it's done. Now I need you to really feel the weight of what I just described, because Shedeur Sanders is not operating in a vacuum. He is operating inside an organization that owes Deshaun Watson $46 million. Let me say that number again clearly. $46 million. That is guaranteed money. Money that does not move, does not adjust, does not disappear based on what happens on a depth chart or a practice field. That money is already gone. It already left the building. The only question is what story the organization tells itself about why it left. I call that organizational gravity. It is the institutional pressure that forms around a massive, irrevocable financial commitment. It bends decision-making. It shapes the way information gets framed internally. It creates a silent, constant pressure to find evidence that the money was justified, to construct a narrative that the investment still makes sense, to avoid the emotional and reputational cost of fully confronting what that contract has meant for this franchise. Every single day that Shedeur Sanders walks into that building, he is walking into the gravitational field of $46 million worth of sunk cost. And the media coverage, in too many places, has been operating inside that same gravity without ever acknowledging it exists. And yet, while all of that is working against him, he is sending content creators away and going back to his footwork. That is the competitive DNA of a player who understands what he's up against and has decided to answer it with work instead of noise. Now let's talk about Josh Cribbs, because what he said deserved a full news cycle and it got a fraction of one. And I think the reason it got buried is because it was too honest and too specific for the current narrative to absorb comfortably. First, understand who Josh Cribbs is in the context of Cleveland Browns football. This is not a television personality manufacturing controversy to fill airtime. This is not some national media figure who parachutes in, drops a take, and leaves. Josh Cribbs gave that city everything he had for years. He is one of the most genuinely beloved figures in the modern history of that franchise, and his credibility with the actual Cleveland fan base, the real ones, the ones who've been watching since the lean years, is the kind that was earned through sacrifice and never needed to be manufactured. When a man with that standing says something uncomfortable about his franchise's direction, you do not reduce him to a talking head with an opinion. You listen carefully. What Cribbs said was straightforward, and that's exactly what made it dangerous to the established story. He wants Shedeur Sanders evaluated on competitive evidence gathered under real conditions, not managed or pre-shaped by the financial pressure working quietly in the background. He wants to see what this quarterback actually is, when the coaching staff is genuinely invested in his growth, when the organizational clarity about the future is real, and when the competition is decided by what happens on the field rather than what the balance sheet demands. And then he said the thing that was clearly designed to land like a brick. He brought up Baker Mayfield. That name, dropped in that city, in that context, carries everything. All the weight, all the regret, all the uncomfortable realization of what Cleveland allowed to walk out the door before it ever got a real chance to show what it was. The Browns ran out of patience. The organizational pressure to justify previous decisions became louder than the evidence in front of them. The story started working against Baker, and then he left and went somewhere that believed in him, and he won a Super Bowl ring. And the city has been sitting with that knowledge ever since. Cribbs was not making a casual historical comparison. He was asking Cleveland a question with surgical precision. Are you really going to do this again? Are you going to let the sunk cost pressure, the noise, the confident declarations, and the pre-written verdict shape what happens to a young quarterback before the real evidence even exists? Are you going to let $46 million already committed cost you something genuine before it has had a single real chance to prove what it is? That is not rhetoric for the sake of drama. That is the foundational question facing this franchise right now, and the answer will echo through their next decade in both directions. Let me now be direct about the financial argument, because it gets made constantly, and it sounds logical enough on the surface that people accept it without pushing back. The reasoning goes like this. The $46 million is already committed regardless. The money does not vanish based on the depth chart. So if you're paying him either way, why not give Watson every opportunity to validate it? Give him the reps, give him the competition. Let the investment defend itself. I understand the math, and I am telling you the math is incomplete. Every rep Watson takes is a rep Sanders does not take. Quarterback development is not a savings account. You cannot defer those reps, bank them, and cash them out later when it's more convenient. A quarterback develops through specific repetitions, accumulated under specific competitive pressure, with specific coaching attention applied at a specific point in his developmental arc. That window does not stay open indefinitely, and there is no accounting line on any spreadsheet that captures what it costs when the player whose job it is to represent this franchise's future has his development arc bent by the organizational need to justify money that is already spent. That cost is real. It will show up eventually. It just will not show up in a way that anyone can easily attach a number to, which is precisely why the people most comfortable citing the $46 million as their analytical foundation keep ignoring it when you put it plainly in front of them. And I'll say this directly. Deshaun Watson has 2 Achilles ruptures. He has been outside of meaningful NFL football for nearly 2 full years. His historical profile as a player was built on dual threat ability, legs that changed the mathematical calculation of every defense on every down. At his best, at his peak, Watson was a quarterback whose most important plays required him to threaten the edges. Those legs are not the same legs after 2 Achilles surgeries. That is not a criticism. It is a medical reality, and it is a football reality that matters enormously when you're talking about what this offense is actually being built to do. Here is the schematic question that almost nobody is asking seriously, and it drives me absolutely crazy. Todd Monken built one of the most potent offenses in the entire NFL in Baltimore, and the load-bearing beam of everything he constructed there was Lamar Jackson, one of the most singular athletic instruments the quarterback position has ever seen, a player whose legs fundamentally reorder every defensive calculation on every snap of every game. That is who Monken had. Now look at Cleveland. Shedeur Sanders is a pocket quarterback. His game is built on timing, precision, structural accuracy, quick processing of coverage, and clean delivery within a system designed around those qualities. He is not a run-first threat. He is not someone whose legs are altering the math of down after down. He is a passer, a genuinely skilled, technically refined, pocket-operating passer. Deshaun Watson, at his peak, and I want to stress that phrase, at his peak, was a dual-threat player whose signature moments were built on scramblability and improvisation with his legs. That version of Watson, even setting aside the injury history, is not what Cleveland has right now. What Cleveland has is a quarterback returning from 2 ruptured Achilles tendons who is attempting to rebuild the functional athleticism that made his historical game what it was. The honest football question, the one that should be at the center of every analytical conversation about this competition, is which of these 2 quarterbacks is the more logical schematic fit for what Todd Monken actually builds when he is constructing an offense from scratch. Because everything about his offensive history and philosophy points toward an answer. And the reason that answer is not being given the serious attention it deserves, in my personal opinion, is that giving it an honest answer would unravel the narrative that has already been built and sold. Let's not gloss over what Shedeur Sanders actually did as a rookie, because the way it gets discussed in certain circles, you would think the man had a forgettable season that raised questions. He played 7 games. 7. In a structurally chaotic franchise, with an offensive line that could not consistently protect him, with an unfinished receiving room, with ownership dynamics in transition around him, conditions that would have broken a significant number of young quarterbacks emotionally, mentally, and competitively. And, after those 7 games, the players and coaches who saw him every week voted him to the Pro Bowl. That is not a sympathy vote. Professional football people do not hand out Pro Bowl selections to make a rookie feel good about a hard year. That is a collective assessment from football professionals that what they were watching in those 7 starts, in those circumstances, in that environment, was genuinely extraordinary. That vote was information, from real evaluators, with real skin in the game. And yet the dominant media framing has consistently positioned Shedeur as the question mark, the unproven quantity, the player with things to answer for. While Watson, 2 Achilles injuries nearly 2 years away from meaningful NFL action, a contract that the organization is emotionally and financially desperate to justify, gets cast as the misunderstood veteran whose best football is waiting just around the corner for the right system to unlock it. I want you to look at that disparity clearly, really look at it, and then ask yourself honestly whose interests that framing serves. Think about what that represents: a new building, a new chapter, a franchise-level reset from the bones up. And the Browns have a genuine opportunity, the kind of opportunity that does not come around often, to walk into that new stadium with a new identity, a new face, and a story that represents what is being built, rather than what has already collapsed under its own weight. New stadiums need origin stories. They need something true, something earned, something that fans can point to and say, that is what this building stands for. And the Shedeur Sanders story already has that architecture built into it. A quarterback who was publicly disrespected during the draft process in ways that were visible and documented. Who played 7 games in conditions that should not have been asked of any young player? Who earned Pro Bowl recognition from his peers anyway? Who spent his offseason working in private in Miami, turning down content creators because he had a competition to earn, and he understood exactly what it would take? Who ran first-team reps at minicamp, had the head coach say so publicly, and still watched the coverage declare the competition functionally over before a single real snap had been taken? That is a story. That is the kind of origin story that fills a new stadium with genuine belief, not just attendance figures. The kind that holds through losses and rebuilding years because it is grounded in something real that people witnessed with their own eyes. But Cleveland only gets to that story if the decisions being made inside that building are based on competitive evidence and not on the emotional weight of $46 million already spent. And here is where I land. The OTAs are not finished. The pads are not on yet. Nobody has played football under real pressure with real consequences. Every statement that has been made, every narrative that has taken root, every confident projection that has spread far enough to pass as consensus, all of it came from 3 days in April. 3 voluntary days of helmets and shorts. The head coach himself called it a first look. He used those words. A first look. We do not know what Shedeur Sanders is yet under real conditions, with this coaching staff and genuine competitive clarity. We do not know what Watson looks like when the pressure is actual, and the game is real, and the defense is not optional. Everything that has been said with confidence was said before any of that existed. And what I have watched closely tells me with real certainty that the conclusion, when it finally comes under conditions that earn the label, is going to be very different from the version that certain people have been working very hard to construct from 3 days in April. Don't let the noise write this story before the story has started, because the real one is going to be worth watching. Yo, if you made it this far, you already know what time it is. Smash that like button right now, not later, right now, because this kind of breakdown takes real work, and the algorithm rewards real support. Drop in the comments. Do you think Shedeur Sanders is getting a fair shot in Cleveland, or is the $46 million already deciding this competition? I want to read every single one. And if you are not subscribed to Dre Reports yet, what are you even doing? Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, because we are just getting started, and I promise you this Browns quarterback situation is going to keep giving us material. I'm Dre Fiver. Stay locked in.